Right. Susanna, I know you're driving. I think Mark said that he could fill the chairman role for the day, if that works for you.
Yes, thank you so much, and I'm sorry about that.
That's okay. So from a parliamentary perspective, I'm going to call us to order here. Actually, now I got to change screens here. Josiah, you actually had an agenda today, though, and I wanted to put that up. So do you have it easy to share?
I didn't have one written, but yeah, there's an agenda. So this is a special session. We're generally continuing what we were working on last week, which is the 2024, or 2 weeks ago, which is the 2024 report. I did have a couple of items I wanted to cover first, if that's okay. I wanted to give a quick update on some time I had in Georgia this week. And then I think we were considering going to public comment period near the beginning, because we have two folks who are not regular members of the council who would like to provide us some input that I think will help frame our conversation for the remainder of the time.
Okay.
That works for you. So yeah, this week I went down to Atlanta. Georgia was hosting a kind of public sector broadly AI conference, and their goal was to get people familiar with how AI could be used safely within the public sector. So they invited education institutions, they invited all of their branches of state government, and also some of their local government to participate. And then a bunch of leaders in the AI space. So implementers like Deloitte and Accenture, and then also folks like AWS and Google and folks like that. So it was interesting. I went because I'm trying to foster a multi-state approach to AI regulation. And so there was an opportunity for me to speak on a panel with one of their legislators about how to approach AI legislation. And so I spoke there on what we're doing. And it was really well received. Georgia is taking a bit of a different approach to what we are. They're really focused on making their state friendly to AI business, and looking at opportunities for like how to do that right out of the gate. We're I think being a little bit of a different approach in that we're focused on learning how to use AI within state government first, and then pivoting to how do we approach regulation outside of state government. But it was certainly interesting conversation there. One of the ideas, and I just sketched this quickly, and we can come back to this later in the session, but this was one idea that I saw down there and thought was an interesting one. And pardon the lo-fi drawing here. They were looking at how to approach explainability from like whether you needed to just be able to explain the process or explain at the case level. And it was divided up in like across the left to right, we've got simple to complex decision making, like simple decision making being things that you could kind of easily do as an if-then statement, or maybe like AI perspective, kind of standard processes like sentiment analysis, right? Like simple things that are used to make decisions that are generally like pretty straightforward. And there they were focused on explaining how the process works, or just using human oversight for simple things. For more complex things, that's where you would need the case level explainability. They also looked at it from the perspective of how much autonomy did the AI system have? Was the AI system kind of taking decisions or making recommendations? And if so, what that meant for explainability. And it wasn't like a completely thought out model, but it was interesting. And I wanted to just put it in front of the council for any reaction. And then we'll be talking about this. It's one of the things that we need to talk about later today. So wanted to get this in front of you all to start thinking about. Any thoughts on this?
So were they, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, did they give like examples, like within each of, somewhere along this XY coordinate, you'd have examples of things we have today, or?
No, they really didn't. And they were it was one of the implementers, and they were trying to sell stuff. So they didn't like build this out in very much detail. They kind of like threw out some ideas in this direction and moved on. They were really talking about AI risks and threats and how we could help to ensure trust. And that was kind of the approach that they were taking, was like, think about it based on the right sizing your explainability based on the complexity and the autonomy of the system.
Okay. John, go ahead.
Yeah, yes, that kind of went to the question I had, is somebody trying to sell you what they could do versus, technically what's possible. Because I was one of those guys who had to sell this stuff. I was wondering if there were some real deep technical expertise involved in that. The actual case specific explainability is a really technically hard problem, and it hasn't been solved generally. So I was wondering how much of that nuance was in the conversation.
Yeah, there was some, and there were some fairly technical folks there. They were really focused on, so the use cases that they were talking about were in the context of like using drone photography and LiDAR to recommend asset management for like bridges and other structures, and how you could sorry, what's that?
No, you're breaking up. I'm trying to figure out if it's on my end or I'm in a state building, so hopefully not. But
I'll stop sharing. Is that better?
I didn't hear the example clearly.
Oh, the example was around drones and LiDAR to inspect highway structures like bridges and make recommendations about treatments.
So I think that, okay, I got you. I just think this is a topic that is, a lot of people talk about, that is very hard to do well. I think in that case, in the case you just said, where that's more of a process explanation,
yep,
where you can say, I found this picture and, we'll take this action. But I think if you tried to say, why does this thing recognize this guy as a perpetrator or something, the specifics of that are very hard to articulate.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, I think you appreciate the issue.
Yeah. Okay. So that was what I wanted to kind of set us up with. We'll be working the rest of the day or the rest of the time on the report. But Mark, if there's no other questions, I think we can probably jump over to the public comment period, if that works for you.
Yeah. I just want to make sure there's no other questions about what you, the event you attended down in Georgia. So, and seeing no other hands go up. Yeah, let's go on to let's open ourselves up. I'm going to make the motion that actually I'm the chair, so someone else should make the motion for us to go to the public comment portion.
So moved.
Okay.
Second, Susanna.
Thank you, Susanna. All right, so all in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay. I think the ayes have it. All right, we're going to go to the public comment, and I think you had any particular order we wanted to talk to either Jay or Jacob.
Let's start with Jay, I think, if that works. And I think Jay, having like looked through your comments a bit, and I did circulate them to the group, but not long ago. So I think if you could frame like the general thrust of your comments, and then if there's any specifics that you'd like to highlight, and maybe, I don't know, keep it to 3-ish, 5 minutes, somewhere in there.
And if you could very briefly at the start, just introduce yourself, because this is recorded.
Sure, absolutely. So good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jay Green. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the policy and research analyst for the Office of Racial Equity. Executive Director Davis invited me to be here to talk about my comments. She asked me to review the draft of the 2024 AI Advisory Council report. So that's what I'm here to do, is just explain some of my comments. Most of my comments were, yes, I strongly agree with this point. That's the majority of my comments. but there were a couple of spots that I noticed that I thought that the report could explain some concepts a little bit further in order to better identify for decision makers and legislators what the potential positives and negatives of certain forms of regulation would be, or maybe just one spot where I disagreed with the report. So yeah, just to keep my comments within the time limit specified, I think I'm going to just focus on the comments where I disagreed, because I think the comments where I agreed were mostly just, I agree with this, can you explain this a little bit further, that kind of thing. So so the spot where I disagreed because of my concerns for the racial equity impacts, I'm looking at B, automated final decision systems, and then some examples of potentially acceptable cases to use automated final decision systems. The second bullet point, automatic approval of benefits application, benefits applications meeting certain criteria. My suggestion to change that would be to modify that example to specify that there should always be a human person making the final decision and providing oversight for AI. Then my comment was based on a really excellent book that I highly recommend reading. It's called Automating Inequality. And the book opens with the author discussing an instance where her husband's medical bills were flagged as potentially fraudulent, which she believed is the outcome of an AI decision model that flagged a number of concerning patterns that could indicate fraud. And it was a very good illustrative example of how even the best intentioned automated decision making can cause real delays and suffering and hardship to a person otherwise in a relatively privileged place in society. So anyway, it's a great book, but it speaks to the sort of systemic nature of the biases that can be baked into AI models, especially when we are using data that is always informed by the history of systemic discrimination in our country.
Yeah, sorry, I apologize if I interrupted you, Jay. I was just going to say, I think that's great feedback. And then as I'm thinking about that, would we all be comfortable if we really kind of change that to the notion of like, if it's an automatic approval of benefits application and there's denials, that there's human review or human intervention to review any denial cases, right? I mean, allowing for the idea that, as long as we're achieving positive outcomes, right? Like if you're being approved, then we not as much need to have a human involved in each case, but we certainly want the kinds of oversight that you're concerned about and we agree with in any case where somebody may be denied, and we don't want the AI to be the cause of that.
Can I ask a really basic question about that? I think for me, I wonder, what does it mean to meet the criteria? Does that just mean, upload proof of blah in this field? And then you could upload anything, like a picture of Mickey Mouse, and be like, okay, you've uploaded something, so we're counting that as meeting criteria. I guess I just want to know, how would the system know that criteria are met if it's like a form submission? Is that what we're talking about, or are we talking about a different kind of application process where something that is automatically approved will have already been verified?
I think it's the kinds of it is there could be forms submitted through the process, but generally, even when there's forms submitted today, we do data capture from those forms, and there's data validation. So the types of criteria I think we're envisioning in this statement is, if you're applying for, say, subsidies through the healthcare exchange, right? Making sure that the number of peoples in your household and your stated income levels and your residency requirements and all those types of things meet those certain types of criteria as we're speaking of. So
I think, yeah, that's where I was going with this, Mark. And I think, Jay, you make a really good point about like this could be clearer. My intent here when I drafted this originally was that we would allow cases where it was like an easy yes to just be completely automated, and that is the type of use that we would like to see. And then if it was a case where it was something other than an easy yes, at that point it would kick to the regular review process. But we could essentially allow that happy path, or in general, I don't know, like driver's license renewal type of thing, right? Like as long as you meet all the criteria and there's no flags on your account, like that should be able to just go through without necessarily needing to wait for a person to review it. Like you might be able to get a reply back within minutes. Whereas if there were flags or if there was something that looked like a concern, it would go through the existing process that we have today.
Jay, your hand's back up.
Yeah, thank you. I think that speaks well to, I think my first comment on this was about laying out specifically, and I'm not an expert on this, but perhaps someone on this council is, what would be required in order to audit a system for bias. So my suggestion was that I think it would be great to have a good understanding, or to lay out specifically in this report, like if you're a vendor, this is the information that you need to make available to our council. My other thought was that as a transgender person, my legal documents are all updated with my preferred name, but there are lots of trans people and disproportionately trans people of color whose legal documents do not match their preferred name. So again, they could be inappropriately flagged as fraudulent because they have different names on different portions of the application or something like that. So that's why I'm thinking about, like, we need to be able to audit these systems and make sure they're not, disproportionately flagging all of the trans people of color because they are suspicious on account of, what the AI has identified as a suspicious pattern of, information not matching up. Yeah, just to give an example of how this could potentially disproportionately impact certain populations over others.
Okay, thank you. John, your hand's up.
Yeah, Jay, you bring up a really good point. In some cases, it's kind of a human, another human could sort of look at the decisions that were made and sort of audit them and to test, to sort of see if there was a bias. But scientifically, the right way to do it is to actually have a test set that represents the decisions that the fair decisions. So there are, like my old IBM did a thing called Faces of Fairness, where they actually had a test set for facial recognition that was more distributed like people really are, in terms of color, in terms of gender, in terms of ethnicity, in terms of disability. And they would numerically be able to, every time a new model came out, you would be able to test technically for fairness. I think there might be some issue, some things, for example, in decisions like for recidivism or loan or things like that, where you could actually create a test set that would actually check for bias and not have it a matter of human opinion. So what I'm saying is we should explore which kinds of problems can have actually a technical test set that checks for bias, not just as an opinion.
So I wrote down 2 comments based on what I'm hearing. The first one is like, make sure that this is clear, that denials are going to be reviewed. Like we are not saying it's okay to automate saying no. And then the second one is that sometimes even the well-meaning path of trying to improve kind of throughput for everyone by automating some of the cases may actually not be appropriate because it could create disparity. Like even just adding that streamlining could actually have an unintended consequence of creating disparity. So we need to, I think those were 2 points that I heard. Was there anything else from the council that I should make sure I add here?
Yes, I do think the point about, when you buy something, asking the vendor for, if they have a test set that actually proves that they're not biased. There are technically available things about human distributions. You can test a model for bias. So I don't know exactly how to capture that, but I think that perhaps putting the responsibility on the vendor who's trying to sell you something to show their procedure for testing for bias.
That's a great point. I'll add that.
I was just trying to reinforce. I think, Jay, you're on a really good point.
Sounds like a good procurement rule.
That's what I was thinking. And Jake has a bunch of comments about that, I think, coming up. So, yeah.
So,
Mark, your hands up.
Yeah. So one of the things, and I don't think this is necessarily part of what we include in the document, but I just wanted to throw this out there because it's germane to what we're talking about now. So in sort of keeping up with the activities in the world and the literature and everything else, it seems like we may soon be on the cusp of some defined standards out there for auditing towards bias or against biased and the kinds of things that we're talking about here, like determining characteristics and such, because there's a bunch of work groups out there who are put themselves together for the specific purpose of, finding techniques, methods, tools, and standards to audit AI for these types of biases. So my point is, I think some point down the road, we can end up maybe ourselves here in this group here considering even the notion of some ISO type standard or somebody else's type standard. And we just want to kind of leave room in our thinking, if not our document here, for that to be coming forward. So. All right, that was my add. So I don't think there's anything else. Any other hands are? Oh, Jay, your hand's up again. Please.
I only had one other point that I thought would be helpful to discuss in the meeting. I think everything else, like I said, was just yes, I agree with this recommendation. So the concern I had was under process changes downstream of the AI system, which is on page. Not sure what page that is. There are no page numbers. On page 3.
Yep, I got it.
Yeah. So I guess that my comment is now in a public record. It was maybe a little more snarky than appropriate, but I wrote that easy appeal is sort of an oxymoron, because our state has a good way to go to really address language access needs in complaint procedures. Our office wrote a big report on language access that was released last January, and you can read more about our sort of recommendations on that in that report. But I think it's worth remembering that even the easiest appeals process, if it's taking place in a language that you don't speak, is going to be much more challenging. So that was the point that I wanted to make sure to make. So Thank you all very much. I really appreciate the serious consideration of this feedback and the opportunity to talk to you on the call today about this.
Yeah, and for myself, thank you very much. These were excellent points you've made, and I think the last one especially, I feel is right on. So I don't know, Josiah, do we want to hear now, kind of make some change there, or we want to get back to that at some?
If anyone has a recommendation for language, I'll include it. Otherwise, I'll just make sure I'll make some recommended language and circulate it to the council later.
Okay. Yeah, let's do that. Okay, thank you very much. And then our other speaker or person interested in our public forum portion, Mr. Jacob Durrell. Jacob, you could introduce yourself. And,
hello.
Yep.
Are you hearing me all right? All right.
We can.
So I'm Jake Durrell. I'm an enterprise architect for the state recently in the AI division. And I provided an article here, just not something I was directed to do by the AI division. This represents my own thoughts and opinions. It relates to procurement of AI. So in my getting acclimated to the field, you hear a lot about value alignment in the development of AI. And to me, it naturally seemed that should extend to the folks working on it, or we should, attempt it to, and attempt to make that the case. And so this, essentially it proposes, it talks about that, the fact that companies operate under the, at least the, perception often that they have to, maximize shareholder value. So whenever you have any ambiguities in a contract, or, things that are just not clearly defined, like the council is trying to, catch as much as possible and anticipate as much as possible about what the state might take on with respect to AI. But if there are gaps to fill in, they need to, err on the side of favoring their bottom line. Now, the state has had a history of having some procurement with corporations like B Corps and other kind of purpose-driven corporations. But I think that even those, just being a B Corp, without real certain kinds of governance and management practices implemented, might not be enough to create the assurances that we'd like we were just talking about, being able to audit and have the vendor keep us aware of issues with the software. But if that falls out of a contractual, if it's 4 years down the line and we don't really we're using the software but don't have a contractual obligation with them, like, what do we, how can we know that they'll report it and just do the right thing, which, may be in the interest of their, at least long-term value of their shareholders, but they might not do it. So this just proposes some, practices at the end that maybe we can, at least in our procurement process, ask for. There's some bullet points in the section 3, I think, that just give them the opportunity to explain, and then when we have to get the sign off on the procurement, that we say how, if and how value alignment might be met in this procurement.
So you're speaking on this, I just want to make it clear for everybody that this is really towards the state's own procurement of services and technology and things involving AI, right? Not so much like these are recommendations just in general.
Right. I think it could apply more broadly than AI, but in particular with AI, that's where we see the and it shouldn't just rely on like overtures, like, oh, we really get what the state's doing and we're aligned with it, and we want, we share the vision. Like, what mechanisms do you have in place, like whistleblower policies? Are your employees protected if they call something out when they see something? So that sort of stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, it might be interesting for this group at some point to kind of review some of the state's mechanisms today in the procurement realm for around like data privacy, data sharing, security policy, like cyber threat sharing, things like that, because there can be some modeling, I think, off of what we're doing today in those other areas that can have at least a template that can apply in some fashion for AI as well. So
what's
go
ahead, Jake.
No, go on.
So what had stood out to me as I was kind of previewing this today, I think that we had talked about having some procurement requirements in our recommendation this year that were kind of specific to AI. And I think, to Mark's point, those can be, pretty small because we do have a lot of good content already in place. But I think one thing that stood out in this document was the idea of there's a unique opportunity, I think, for whistleblower protections
Yeah.
in organizations that are providing us with AI systems to ensure that if somebody does the right thing and tells us that, hey, this AI was biased and reports it to us, that there's some level of protection for them as an employee of a contractor with the state. And I know that that's like weird, squishy legal ground, and I'm not sure how to accomplish it, but the idea I thought was a good one.
Yeah, well, I'd love to, help tackle that, if you want to revisit that.
Yeah, I mean, maybe even having like an entire, session on that kind of thing, like just, basically recommend as a next step to have an entire agenda devoted to sort of updating our procurement policies and contracts, or in some way that would address this. So, and include these things. We might need to start with a little bit of a primer as to what we do now with things like our attachment C's and D's and things like that. But
so I think there's a couple of approaches here. One is we can incorporate any of this language that we want to incorporate, or any language derived from this that we want to incorporate. The other is a bit like we did last year. We put some placeholders in our annual report and said, this is a thing that takes like that we just need more time and to come back to it. And I think we could work this either way. Yeah, go ahead, John.
I don't know how state government, the government procurement stuff works, but it sounds like it's pretty distributed. Do we owe the people who do procurement like a hands-on conversation about what we're trying to do, as opposed to just writing it and have them hopefully read it and understand it? Should we have it's sometime in the next year, a live or recorded session to explain?
Yeah. I think it's a little bit of column A, a little bit of column B, meaning that right now within the state, at least within the executive branch, I should say, the Agency of Digital Services owns all technology contracts. So even if it's a procurement from the Human Services Agency or somebody else, we essentially sponsor that contract, and it comes through us and we approve it. And today it gets, treated by guys like Jake with our own sort of common set of requirements for things. But I think there is, to your point, still plenty of room for a more broad sort of educational component, I'll call it that, for folks, right? Because the one of the things I think that's happening is when we hear people around here talk about AI, they presume at some point that like the state is building its own sort of Vermont version of like ChatGPT or something like that. And I don't think they quite realize that even today, pretty much all the products we're buying, and we're not buying things and bringing them in-house, we're essentially signing up for software as a service and cloud services, and those things all have AI in them already, in effect, right? Like, it's common knowledge that we have tools out there that they include AI, and so it's really about imbuing those contracts and those types of conversations with, okay, before we didn't talk to you about the AI componentry of your solution, but now we need to.
I think that centralization of that procurement makes me feel better about compliance with this. So that's
yes, yeah.
If you could throw that back up for 1 second.
Yeah.
Sorry. There's just one last point I wanted to mention. So there was a paragraph there, like if there's, maybe one thing to suggest, and maybe not this language, but like, I know there's no question like this now on procurement materials, but like, just adding a question when AI is at issue, to, draw out some responses and get these vendors to start thinking about that. And Yeah, and there are some instances where I think that, we'll have like a broad, like, Microsoft or, like an AI thing might turn on in Teams that we can just start using because we're already buying it. And I think that there needs to be, controls on when we actually light them up. But yeah,
We're using it already.
right. It could, yeah, say, just sum up what Mark was saying in that meeting, so I don't need to listen, and then it could short shrift him. And
Wow. Okay, so thank you, Jake. If anybody has any more comments or questions, and if nobody else from the public has anything that they would like to ask or contribute, then I think we're going to close the public portion and we're going to go back to the document and kind of try to make some more headway into it. So
thank you.
Thank you as well. Yeah, I very much
very much.
appreciate your inputs. Okay, Josiah, you're up.
All right, I'm gonna screen share. So I'm happy to, let's see. What I wanted to talk about today was workforce development, and then if there was any additional things on procurement, after having had that conversation, I guess let's start there. Is there any additional language that we want to add to procurement standards at this time? Or what is the direction of the AI Council for me for additional language to add to the procurement section? If anything, it can just be a placeholder if that's where we want to go.
My general thought is I think it needs to be, rather than like embedded in the contract throughout, like maybe we define like a specific attachment like we do for some of the others around privacy and security. And Michelle, I don't know what your thoughts on that are, and but just so that we can, instead of trying to weave it, have it be more standardly applied. And John, you had your hand up.
Yeah.
But John, is it all right if I ask Michelle to respond and then go back to you? Thank you. Okay.
Are you asking how we would approach this in
Yeah.
making procurement policy, or how we'd actually implement some of these
I think
ideas?
more the implementation, like.
Yeah, I thought John's comment was pretty apt because we'd have to involve the contracting folks. Obviously, we'd be talking to BGS and our own contracting shops and talking about how we would. First of all, I think a place where we could include it is in the IT procurement guide, which is mandatory for state agencies to follow. Could set some standards in there. Then we'd have to come up with, what sort of criteria and asks we would want to put into a RFP, request for proposals. I'm just thinking along the lines of, we have, as a executive order requires us to consider the climate change kind of posture of a company that is applying to get a Vermont contract. And so that, when that executive order was promulgated, then we had to figure out how we're going to implement it. And BGS came up with a really good form that the contractor would fill out to explain, what its green practices were, things like that. And then we had to, in that case, the decision was that we would give a preference to contractors with green practices, all other factors being equal, which is a little interesting. We could try something like that with appropriate support, or we could just make it a factor in our evaluation. So that'd be the next thing. When you're setting up your evaluation criteria, you have to say, all right, here's how we're going to evaluate your ethics, your practices around AI, and here's the score or weight that it's going to get. And then we'd have to come up with the contract clauses themselves that maybe required them to continue those practices, or, let us know of changes, or, things like that. So it's a pretty multi-step process, but it's one we could certainly start talking about now, and kind of get an idea of the art possible here. And I think it would be a great idea include the contracting folks in these discussions at some point.
Cool. Thank you. John, thank you for your patience.
Just yeah, just apropos of the conversation we had before, should we put the wording here? I'm trying to see where it would belong, but that in the description of the system, we talk about what data sources, et cetera. Can we ask them to show proof of fairness testing, sort of to Jay's point? You know, like what was your procedure for checking for bias? Oh, did you just put that in? Oh, yeah, well, you just put it in. Okay, I didn't see it.
I'm writing in real time. Yep.
Oh, okay. Oh, gosh, technology. All right. What do you all think of that? I mean, I think that puts them on sort of, you know, they haven't thought of it by now. This will force them to think about it.
And I think that's a nice, like, where we are today, that'll probably be updated at some point to what I was saying earlier, as ISO standards or those other types of certification standards for proof of absence of bias or whatever come up, we can pivot to those. But I think this is great for now. Just show us what you do and we'll apply our own.
So one thought I have as I'm listening to this, we had said we wanted to address procurement standards this year in this report. What I'm hearing is, yes, we want to rough in what we think the procurement standards should look like, but that's probably like roughed in and then handed off to ADS to figure out how to like make an attachment for it.
Mm-hmm.
And it, like the recommendation is ADS should go make an attachment. There's a fair bit of overlap for Mark and I on our role in that particular activity, but we can get on that.
Okay.
Anything else on procurement? If not, I'll pivot to workforce.
No, I was just going to say I like the insertion of the language about showing the proof of the testing, of the fairness testing, and also I did appreciate the examples of putting it into the procurement language as if like it's, you know, like it's as if you're doing a rubric, for example, where you're scoring. I think that might be good. The other suggestion or the other option about the all other factors remaining equal, I feel a little bit funny about that, only because I know that once we start weighing other things of import to us in these kinds of contracts, like for example, simultaneously our office always encourages bid reviewers to look for, you know, what are the equity considerations that this vendor takes on? What are the kinds of things that they do to ensure whether it's diversity in their subcontractors or whatever it is? And so I would want to make sure that we are giving full weight, I guess, to all of the things the state chooses to espouse as a value in these processes. So I think I like the idea of incorporating it more on the rubric side, more than a sort of superseding clause side, if that makes any sense. So I guess general agreement to everything that I'm hearing.
Yeah, I was feeling a little funny about that as well. And I'm trying to, like, some of the things we've said about, like, up at the beginning of this document feel much more like thou shalts and, like, more like requirements and less like recommendations, right? Like, if you're going to be making a decision that's going to be taking an action, it needs to be transient and reversible, right? Like, that kind of thing feels much more thou shalt-y rather than like, you should weigh whether or not they do that as a factor in your consideration. So I think it will vary a little bit across these items, I think. Okay. Mark, cool if I go
Please.
down to, all right.
Away, my friend, scroll away.
All right. So, we had talked about having the AI division identify like tool patterns that are likely to be used and to start identifying training. What I wanted to do was like, is this all we want to say about workforce? It's just like the AI division should go figure that out. Or is there additional stuff that we want to say at this point about how we want to prepare the workforce like broad strokes. Is there more here? Should we keep just this much in, or should we strike this section?
If I may, I think kind of going back to the same sort of education's outreach, there might be some tools out there that, you know, somebody clicks a switch and it has more AI content or already has one, so it doesn't go through procurement. I think some sort of, in terms of workforce development for the state, is some sort of education to know what AI can and can't do, and to understand that AI is not necessarily a tool unto itself, like ChatGPT. It might be in, you know, your browser or whatever. And I think a little bit of awareness, just like you might do for other sensitivities, so that the people who are using even existing tools kind of would maybe help us screen for these AI kind of things and bring them to our attention. They won't know what to look for. So from a workforce development, should we do some training about, you know, proper use of AI and what AI means and how to know if your tool has some? That, I didn't say that very well, but you know what I mean? It's like you're asking people to comply with this and they don't really know what to look for. Is that too vague?
No,
I
I think that's a great point. Go Mark.
No. I wasn't gonna challenge that at all. I think that those are great points. I was gonna add an area that I think maybe we indicate we're heading towards, but we don't actually have the information yet. But like with every big, not just technology shift, but every big, you know, I don't know what you call it. This is more era driven. Like, I don't know that we even really know what types of roles we're going to need within the state, right? I mean, we're approaching this today we have people from who are serving other roles who are picking up adjuncts other than yourself right now, Josiah, right? But I mean, just listening to, you know, Jay speak and you know, their reading and kind of studying of some of these other aspects, that's clear that, you know, we're going to need like people who are looking at sort of some of these ethical questions, some of these human impact type things that happen with AI, and really start to think about some long-term roles within the state too, you know?
Yeah, it's like our conversations around user experience design, but like thinking much more about impact, like not the individual user, but the community impact.
Right. I mean, you think about it, today we have people who know the ins and outs of, you know, policy for Medicaid claims and healthcare claims and things like that, and they totally understand that as like an entire domain, right? I think there's almost going to be a need for, you know, just understanding the potential runaway impacts of AI from a humanistic, in like the claims areas and case management areas, things like that. So. Oh, sorry, I'll take my own hand down.
Other things on this one? I think this was helpful for me as I'm figuring out what to put there.
Yeah, and we spent a considerable amount of time in sort of the precursor. It wasn't a council, it was sort of the committee that was leading to this, and we talked about really how do we develop the public-private educational type partnerships that, you know, are building that workforce of tomorrow. And I think maybe some indication of need and direction there, right?
That's a great point. Phil, I know like your organization is doing a lot of work with this. Is there specific learnings that you have that we should be incorporating into this section?
So, to kind of touch to the same thing that Mark said, what is going to happen in the next couple of years is the implementation of these tool sets are going to take place widely across the software and systems that we're using already. And in ways, it's going to automate component pieces, which we may not even have control over. If you look really carefully, you'll find that voice transcription has almost wiped out the shortfall of medical transcriptionists in a number of hospitals around the United States, regardless of the effectiveness of the medical transcription software. And there's a couple of good articles that basically said it's done it because we couldn't find the transcriptionists, and what they're producing is not necessarily in the best outcome for healthcare. I think we're going to see a lot more of these examples because that's a form of machine learning that allows us to do that. So we're going to see a lot of this stuff taking place. When I think about workforce development, I think about upskilling and reskilling our employees to be able to embrace and use these tools as they go forward. In a lot of ways, we provided tools to people, the old guy in the room, right? We provided people with a lot of tools. I remember handing out laptop computers as a way to actually give faculty members the ability to access and do things beyond sitting in their physical offices. And that changed the nature over time of the work that they performed. There also changed the expectations of that work. So I think we need to think about upskilling and reskilling in this area. We also need to think carefully about what kind of positions will be eliminated. How many? It's interesting, but my college roommate's mother ran 75 operators in a call center for Ma Bell in Bennington, Vermont. Those jobs don't exist either. So as SS7 eliminated a lot of those capabilities over time. So there's some stuff here that's going to happen that's going to be natural. You can't go to a grocery store without instead of 15 people checking you out, one person helping you to eliminate their job, as my brother would say, God rest his soul. So we do have a change taking place here, and we need to think about our employees and how to skill them to do that at this time. And I also believe that, and we've got a lot of traction on campus here, instead of focusing on how to remove or eliminate any sort of AI, how do you get the students to understand what the opportunity is associated with it, appropriately document what they're doing and how they're using those systems, and to be able to empower them as they go forward, because that's going to be the reality. I have to go to the library and do research, or go online and do research if I'm going to start and move in a new area. This is just another tool set that allows us to jump forward. So I'm done. Over.
Yeah, I think it's ironic that this might be the last entirely human-generated report the state receives. The AI committee's report.
Yes. There's an interesting context. Thank you, Mark. I appreciate it. Those big architecture guys always come up with something that confounds me. So thank you.
It's funny you said that, because I've been using ChatGPT not to write stuff, but to critique and help improve it. It would be fun to see what improvements or simplifications it might make in this document. Not that we would report it, but it would be an interesting exercise.
We could use our citation if we did. We have a citation for that.
How would that be?
Cool. All right. Well, thank you. This was really helpful for me. So our next meeting is January 5th. which I hope works. I guess if it doesn't work, please decline the invite, which all the council members should have. And if we realize that so many people have declined that we don't have quorum, we can do a special session the week after or something. And this report is due on the 15th. So I'll try to draft and then circulate this before that, so you have time to do final comments. And we can hopefully wrap this document up at our next session. John,
Thank
did you have your hand up?
No, I think he just took it down.
He was waving. Okay.
Yeah. So thank you very much, and I think we're gonna wrap this up, but we do need a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. That's what I'm good for.
All right. Any seconds?
I'll second.
Thank you. And hopefully you're traveling safely, Susanna.
I sure am.
Okay. All right. So all in favor of adjourning, and we'll see each other on the 5th. Aye.
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 All right. Ayes definitely have it. All right. Well,
Bye,
thank you
everyone.
all, and have some happy holidays. And
Thanks, everyone.
yep.
Yes.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.